aren't going to make a difference to the overall segments of things that people buy for their households every day. But the trouble with that argument is that they also announced yesterday 200% tariffs are coming on pharmaceutical goods. And we know we have a litany of other sectoral tariffs across steel, aluminum, automobiles, aircraft, jet engines. There's more coming on a whole host of different components, including additional pieces that go into your home, like copper. And then adding worse impact to even just that are the 21 new letters that we're getting, with more to come, that hit different states, different nations at different rates, and are going to be a sort of perpetual source of uncertainty, as opposed to the one-time hit that Secretary Besson and other cabinet officials like to talk about. So the inflation reaction is expected to come this month in CPI data that comes out next week and throughout the rest of the summer. And that's on estimates from Goldman Sachs on down to us. So it's pretty expensive and extensive.
How are the banks looking at these new, other than these CPI estimates that they're making, how are they looking at Donald Trump's, it seems like there's a new tariff every other day or a new announcement. Are they paying attention to the Truth Social page that he's posting this stuff on?
Oh, yeah, all day, every day. And I would say that the lack of forewarning to the street is a problem. We saw that in the copper markets. I think it was the biggest move in copper markets since the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. These are things that you can have analysts like me say, I heard that they're coming this week. And then, in fact, they did come yesterday. But most of the street is not expecting these updates until the end of the summer. And they're looking at the 270-day increments for the potential for this investigation to be released. So this lack of clarity is creating these dramatic swings in the market, which, of course, is not constructive to a stable free market economy.
Justin, I'm so lost in the sauce on this. I mean, we've been talking about this for months. Every day there's a new tariff. I'm having a hard time keeping track of who's getting what and when, and whether Donald Trump is pausing things or moving deadlines. How does a corporation, how does a business, an importer, an exporter, small and big, how does a consumer keep track of this? How do they prepare for this? What should they be doing?
Katie, the only good thing about this is I get to hang out with you more often. Because the more confused we are, occasionally you feel like you've got to call an economist. Let me actually, for the audience at home, actually the letters turn out to be really simple to keep track of. So first of all, take your mind back to April 2. President Trump stood in the Rose Garden and held that big poster up and said, these are the tariff rates I'm going to put on a whole bunch of countries. Markets tanked as they understood how destructive, incoherent and ridiculous they were. This was a tariff formula that no economist on the planet has stood up for. And so within 7 days, the president was convinced they were a really bad idea. So to save face, he pressed pause. Now, the 90 days are up today. And you know what he's done? He's now sent out the first 21 of these letters. They've suggested the new tariff rate for each of these countries will be almost exactly the same as what he said back in April 2nd, except just to make this a little harder to keep track of, he's added or subtracted a couple of percentage points depending on which country you are, in what, as far as I can tell, is a thoroughly random manner. But at the very least, let's folks inside the White House say that something changed over the last 90 days. But the reality for people at home is, and this is what makes it easy, this is Liberation Day, the summer rerun. It's just the sequel. He's going back to the same policy. If you didn't like it then, you're not going to like this sequel. And I don't quite understand why they think it's going to sell better this time.
I wonder if we can put the markets up on the screen, because when this was initially announced that, you know, the Independence Day stuff and the weeks after, the markets just were in nosedive mode. You know, they were up and down, up and down, up and down, lots of down. We've seen the markets not react as heavily or as dramatically in the past few weeks, other than what Henrietta was saying about the copper markets. Can you explain that, Justin? Why am I looking at the stock market right now, the Dow in the green?
Yeah, so what happened on April 2 back on Liberation Day is Trump announced a set of tariffs as the policy. And they were so shocking that people had baked in that he was Mr. Tariff, that he was tariff man, and it was worse than that. And that's why markets were terrified. What subsequently happened was he backed down on everything. And then we got this new word. People love this word, taco, the claim that Trump always chickens out. And when you talk to people on Wall Street about why they're so calm, they seem to be remarkably of the view that they're certain that Trump is, in fact, a taco, that he will chicken out again. I think they're overstating it. And I would be building in a very, very real risk that he's serious about it. And if that's true, then what's going to happen over the next few weeks through to August 1st is they're slowly going to wake up that these tariffs are coming. And if that's the case, then financial markets are going to react. But that's going to be much more of a slow motion train wreck than the sort of pyrotechnics we saw last time.
There's also news that the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is doing something unusual, Henrietta, that we haven't seen before. He's starting to criticize the Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
Talked about, and I've mentioned this before, is it's not just the tariffs that are pissing off Wall Street and other investors. Like, those in and of themselves are generally seen as negative by capitalist bigwigs. Right? There's, if you're a believer in the neoclassical economics, you're like, generally you want free trade, right? But let's be clear, capitalists are also hypocrites. And so when free trade and when regulations pop up that benefit the rich and wealthy and well-connected, they love them. The problem with Trump's tariffs is that even for the sectors of the economy they do benefit, and there are some, but at least hypothetically, there's not enough consistency and conviction on the part of Trump to manifest that. So, for example, some industries are going to lose out, some might win. But let's say you're an industry that's been largely outsourced to other countries. But with tariffs, now it's possible for you to manufacture a certain good in the United States that you can't anymore. So Trump says, I'm doing tariffs on this with China. And you're like, okay, I'm going to start buying land up and building a factory and hiring workers and all of this and all of that, because now it's profitable to compete with China. And then Trump the next day is like, no, I'm not doing those tariffs. Or I'm canceling them for 2 months. We'll see it again in 2 months. Even if you can benefit, you lose. And this goes into it further. Investors are pissed.
Joining us now, MSNBC's The Weekend primetime co-host and the Washington Post opinion columnist, Catherine Rampell, and former Congressional Budget Office Director and American Action Forum President Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Ashley Parker is still with us. Catherine, what does a good deal look like to President Trump?
It's whatever President Trump says is a good deal at any given moment.
Do we know what he likes? What he wants to see?
It's all about marketing for him. He is the master of repackaging the status quo as a victory. And that's basically what he's been doing over and over and over again with all of these deals, frameworks for concepts of deals, except we are actually much worse off than, in fact, the prior status quo, because he will declare victory. Oh, we have a deal when he partially rolls back tariffs on another country, but the tariffs are still much higher than was the case before he came into office.
Didn't we see a version of this with the USMCA during the first administration?
Absolutely.
He said it's the most amazing deal, and it really wasn't that much different than NAFTA.
It was not very different from NAFTA, and in fact, what was new in it was largely just transplanted from a different trade deal that he had pulled us out of, or that he basically put the kibosh on before we could formally be added to it, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So he kind of mashed together two things that he said were terrible and said this is the best deal ever, and then, of course, violated the terms of that deal. Now, that was a real deal in the sense that Congress had to ratify it. That is how this is supposed to work. The executive branch negotiates the terms of these things, and then it's supposed to go through Congress so that the terms can actually be implemented. And in that case, Trump touted it as this big victory. And then, of course, he comes back into office and says, that was junk. I'm going to disregard everything in it. That was the deal with Canada and Mexico. And then he levied new tariffs on Canada and Mexico, which is part of the reason why I think it's very difficult to call any of what he is doing a deal in the sense of it's not binding. And certainly he just unilaterally tears things up whenever he wants to. So it's very difficult to get countries to give meaningful concessions because they understand, that he's not going to honor his end of the bargain anyway.
And Douglas, we've been talking about this for 90 days now. And I said a little bit earlier that I'm kind of lost in the sauce here because I can't tell what the president wants or what he's doing or what he's going to do tomorrow. And I'm not negotiating with him. So if you are a country that's trying to find common ground for tariffs, how do you approach this?
Well, I think Catherine summarized the state of play really well. And I think the important thing is that, the effective U.S. tariff rate now is 15%. It's up to 17 in the aftermath of the so-called spate of deals this week. So that's worlds away from the 2% or less that it was before he took office. So with all of this, I'm making a deal, let's cut a deal, let's pause, let's raise, let's lower. The reality is he has imposed on the rest of the world the tariffs that he promised when he was campaigning. And we always talk about the uncertainty, but the certain thing is tariffs are higher and will remain higher if he is president of the United States. And so if you're in another country, you're like, well, he's not going to honor anything I want. He's going to get what he wants. Let's go look elsewhere for trading partners. And that's what's going on. There is, in fact, a real fallout from this, which is a reshaping of global supply chains and trading relationships and geopolitical relationships. And he may view this as fun and games in the art of the deal, but it has real ramifications for the operation of the U.S. economy, which has been damaged by this, and by our standing in the world.
So who benefits from this?
I think there's been very little benefit to the United States. I mean, you can find some particular cases, but there's damage to our relationship with allies. So right now he has violated the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Senate ratified, done over many, many years under both Republicans and Democrats. He says, I'm going to put a 25% tariff on Korea. Well, that's just a flat violation. It's the same as the USMCA. So who's going to get into the serious business of a trade deal? Something that's a couple of hundred pages long, ratified by the Senate. He called the deal with, Vietnam a deal. It's a Truth Social post. He's calling the letters he's sending to other people with no response a deal. Those aren't deals. That's him just imposing these taxes. And remember, despite his strange way of playing, keeping score, these are taxes on the American businesses and the American people who use those products. Yeah, and they will take their toll. And you can't escape that.
It's a declaration.
Yeah.
So I guess the question that I have, Doug, is at what point do people start to feel it? I mean, you're already feeling it in some sectors. I've mentioned this before. Sure. I mean, I had to pay UPS a tariff. The cost of the item was the same. And I thought, okay, great. This country is eating the cost of the item. It got sent to me. And when UPS knocked on my door, they said, oh, by the way, you owe us $100. And I said, what? I mean, so at what point does it start to be felt and absorbed by the American public?
There's no clarity. Again, in some ways, unclear policy in this vein is worse than bad policy. Maybe not worse than awful policy, but if you have a policy that's not ideal, but you have time to prepare for it, you can mitigate the damages. And some people who plan well and get a little lucky will end up ahead. So when Trump is like, I'm doing tariffs, but there's no rationale behind them, there's no reason behind them, there's no consistency, there's no broad industrial policy that like the investor class can understand and therefore take advantage of, this is what happens. Even the people that could benefit won't benefit because Trump chickens out. They can't eat tacos for dinner every night, Donald.